双语音标领航，注音阅读启蒙，叶兴阳有声读物。
From the Memoirs of a Minister of France by Stanley Weyman. Contents: I, the clockmaker of Poissy. 2, the tennis balls. 3, 2 mayors of Baudetort. 4, La Toussaint. V, the lost cipher. 6, the man of Monceaux. 7, the governor of Garrett. 8, the open shutter. 9, the maid of honor. X, farming the taxes. 11, the cat and the king. 12, at Fontainebleau. I, the clockmaker of Poissy. Foreseeing that some who do not love me will be swift to allege that in the preparation of these memoirs I have set down only such things as redound to my credit, and have suppressed the many experiences not so propitious which fall to the lot of the most sagacious while in power, I take this opportunity of refuting that calumny. For the truth stands so far the other way that my respect for the king's person has led me to omit many things creditable to me, and some, it may be, that place me in a higher light than any I have set down. And not only that, but I propose in this very place to narrate the curious details of an adventure wherein I showed to less advantage than usual, and on which I should, were I moved by the petty feelings imputed to me by malice, be absolutely silent. One day, about a fortnight after the quarrel between the king and the Duchess of Beaufort, which I have described, and which arose, it will be remembered, out of my refusal to pay the christening expenses of her second son on the scale of a child of France. I was sitting in my lodgings at St. Germain's when my nin announced that M. de Perrot desired to see me. Knowing Perrot to be one of the most notorious beggars about the court, with an insatiable maw of his own, and an endless train of nephews and nieces, I was at first for being employed, but reflecting that in the crisis in the king's affairs which I saw approaching and which must, if he pursued his expressed intention of marrying the Duchess, be fraught with infinite danger to the state, and himself the least help might be of the greatest moment, I bade them admit him, privately determining to throw the odium of any refusal upon the overweening influence of Madame de Sourdis, the Duchess's aunt. Accordingly, I met him with civility, and was not surprised when, with his second speech, he brought out the word favor. But I was surprised for, as I have said, I knew him to be the best practiced beggar in the world to note in his manner some indications of embarrassment and nervousness, which, when I did not immediately assent, increased to a sensible extent. It is a very small thing, M. de Rony, he said, breathing hard. On that hint, I declared my willingness to serve him. But, I added, shrugging my shoulders and speaking in a confidential tone, no one knows the court better than you do. M. de Perrot. You are in all our secrets, and you must be aware that at present I say nothing of the Duchess. She is a good woman, and devoted to His Majesty, but there are others. I know, he answered, with a flash of malevolence that did not escape me. But this is a private favor. M. de Rony. It is nothing that Madame de Sourdis can desire, either for herself or for others. That aroused my curiosity. Only the week before, Madame de Sourdis had obtained a hat for her son, and the post of Assistant Deputy Comptroller of Buildings for her groom of the chambers. For her niece the Duchess, she meditated obtaining nothing less than a crown. I was at pains, therefore, to think of any office, post, or pension that could be beyond the pale of her desires, and in a fit of gaiety I bade M. de Perrot speak out and explain his riddle. It is a small thing, he said, with ill-disguised nervousness. The king hunts tomorrow. Yes, I said, and very commonly he rides back in your company. M. le Marquis. Sometimes, I said, or with M. d'Epernon. Or, if he is in a mood for scandal, with M. La Varenne or Vitry. But with you, if you wish it, and care to contrive it so, he persisted, with a cunning look. I shrugged my shoulders. Well, I said, wondering more and more what he would be at. I have a house on the farther side of Poissy. he continued, and I should take it as a favor.
M de Rony.
If you could induce the king to dismount there tomorrow and take a cup of wine. That is a very small thing, I said bluntly, wondering much why he had made so great a parade of the matter, and still more why he seemed so ill at ease. Yet, after such a prelude, if any but a friend of your tried loyalty asked it, I might expect to find Spanish licorice in the cup. That is out of the question. In my case, he answered with a slight assumption of offense, which he immediately dropped. And you say it is a small thing. It is the more easily granted.
M de Rony.
But the king goes and comes at his pleasure, I replied warily. Of course, he might take it into his head to descend at your house. There would be nothing surprising in such a visit. I think that he has paid you one before.
M de Perrault.
He assented eagerly. And he may do so, I said, smiling.
Tomorrow.
But then, again, he may not. The chase may lead him another way, or he may be late in returning, or in fine, 100 things may happen. I had no mind to go farther than that, and I supposed that it would satisfy him, and that he would thank me and take his leave. To my surprise, however, he stood his ground, and even pressed me more than was polite, while his countenance, when I again eluded him, assumed an expression of chagrin and vexation so much in excess of the occasion as to awaken fresh doubts in my mind. But these only the more confirmed me in my resolution to commit myself no farther, especially as he was not a man I loved or could trust, and in the end he had to retire with such comfort as I had already given him. In itself, and on the surface, the thing seemed to be a trifle, unworthy of the serious consideration of any man. But in so far as it touched the king's person and movements, I was inclined to view it in another light, and this the more, as I still had fresh in my memory the remarkable manner in which Father Cotton, the Jesuit, had given me a warning by a word about a boxwood fire. After a moment's thought, therefore, I summoned Boisrouel, one of my gentlemen, who had an acknowledged talent for collecting gossip, and I told him in a casual way that M. de Perrault had been with me. He has not been at court for a week, he remarked. Indeed? I said. He applied for the post of Assistant Deputy Comptroller of Buildings for his nephew, and took offense when it was given to Madame de Sourdis' groom of the chambers.
Ha!
I said. A dangerous malcontent. Boisrouel smiled. He has lived a week out of the sunshine of His Majesty's countenance. Your Excellency. After that, all things are possible. This was my own estimate of the man, whom I took to be one of those smug, pliant self-seekers whom courts and peace breed up. I could imagine no danger that could threaten the king from such a quarter, while curiosity inclined me to grant his request. As it happened, the deer the next day took us in the direction of Poissy, and the king, who was always itching to discuss with me the question of his projected marriage, and as constantly, since our long talk in the garden at Rennes, avoiding the subject when with me, bade me ride home with him. On coming within half a mile of Perrault's, I let fall his name, and in a very natural way suggested that the king should alight there for a few minutes. It was one of the things Henry delighted to do, for, endowed with the easiest manners, and able in a moment to exchange the formality of the Louvre for the freedom of the camp, he could give to such cheap favors their full value. He consented on the instant, therefore, and, turning our horses into a by-road, we sauntered down it with no greater attendance than a couple of pages. The sun was near setting, and its rays, which still gilded the tree-tops, left the wood below pensive and melancholy. The house stood in a solitary place on the edge of the forest, half a mile from Poissy, and these two things had their effect on my mind. I began to wish that we had brought with us half a troop of horse, or at least 2 or 3 gentlemen, and, startled by the thought of the unknown chances to which, out of mere idle curiosity, I was exposing the king, I would gladly have turned back. But, without explanation, I could not do so. And while I hesitated, Henry cried out gaily that we were there. A short avenue of limes led from the forest road to the door. I looked curiously before us as we rode under the trees, in some fear lest M. de Perrot's preparations should discover my complicity, and apprise the king that he was expected. But so far was this from being the case that no one appeared. The house rose still and silent in the mellow light of sunset, and, for all that we could see, might have been the fabled palace of enchantment. "He is Jean de Nivelle's dog. He runs away when you call him," the king quoted. "Get down, Rosny. We have reached the palace of the sleeping princess. It remains only to sound the horn." And I was in the act of dismounting, with my back to him, when his words came to this sudden stop. I turned to learn what caused it, and saw standing in the aperture of the wicket, which had been silently opened, a girl, little more than a child, of the most striking beauty. Surprise shone in her eyes, and shyness and alarm had brought the color to her cheeks, while the level rays of the sun, which forced her to screen her eyes with one small hand, clothed her figure in a robe of lucent glory. I heard the king whistle low. Before I could speak, he had flung himself from his horse, and, throwing the reins to one of the pages, was bowing before her. "We were about to sound the horn, mademoiselle," he said, smiling. "The horn,
Monsieur?
she exclaimed, opening her eyes in wonder, and staring at him with the prettiest face of astonishment. "Yes, mademoiselle, to awaken the sleeping princess," he rejoined. "But I see that she is already awake." Through the innocence of her eyes flashed a sudden gleam of archness. "Monsieur flatters himself," she said, with a smile that just revealed the whiteness of her teeth. It was such an answer as delighted the king, who loved, above all things, a combination of wit and beauty, and never for any long time wore the chains of a woman who did not unite sense to more showy attractions. From the effect which the grace and freshness of the girl had on me, I could judge in a degree of the impression made on him. His next words showed not only its depth, but that he was determined to enjoy the adventure to the full. He presented me to her as M. de Sage, and, inquiring affectionately after Perrot, learned in a trice that she was his niece, not long from a convent at Laux. Finally, begging to be allowed to rest a while, he dropped a gallant hint that a cup of wine from her hands would be acceptable. All this, and her innocent doubt what she ought to do, thus brought face to face with two strange cavaliers, threw the girl into such a state of blushing confusion as redoubled her charms. It appeared that her uncle had been summoned unexpectedly to Marly, and had taken his son with him, and that the household had seized the occasion to go to a village fete at Acres. Only an old servant remained in the house, who presently appeared and took her orders. I saw from the man's start of consternation that he knew the king, but a glance from Henry's eyes bidding me keep up the illusion, I followed the fellow and charged him not to betray the king's incognito. When I returned, I found that mademoiselle had conducted her visitor to a grassy terrace which ran along the south side of the house, and was screened from the forest by an alley of apple trees, and from the east wind by a hedge of yew. Here, where the last rays of the sun threw sinuous shadows on the turf, and Paris seemed a million miles away, they were walking up and down, the sound of their laughter breaking the woodland silence. Mademoiselle had a fan, with which, and an air of convent coquetry, she occasionally shaded her eyes. The king carried his hat in his hand. It was such an adventure as he loved, with all his heart, and I stood a little way off, smiling, and thinking grimly of M. de Perrot. On a sudden, hearing a step behind me, I turned, and saw a young man in a riding dress come quickly through an opening in the yew hedge. As I turned, he stopped. His jaw fell, and he stood rooted to the ground, gazing at the two on the terrace, while his face, which a moment before had worn an air of pleased expectancy, grew on a sudden dark with passion, and put on such a look as made me move toward him. Before I reached him, however, De Perrault himself appeared at his side. The young man flashed round on him.
Mon Dieu.
Sir, he cried, in a voice choked with anger. I see it all now. I understand why I was carried away to Marly. But it shall not be. I swear it shall not. Between him and me, needless to say,
I, too,
understood all. De Perrault was awkwardly placed, but he showed the presence of mind of the old courtier. Silence, sir, he exclaimed imperatively. Do you not see de Rosny? Go to him at once and pay your respects to him, and request him to honor you with his protection. Or I see that you are overcome by the honor which the king does us.
Go.
First, and change your dress. Go.
Boy.
The lad retired sullenly, and de Perrault, free to deal with me alone, approached me, smiling assiduously, and trying hard to hide some consciousness and a little shame under a mask of cordiality. 1,000 pardons,
M. de Rosny,
he cried with effusion, for an absence quite unpardonable. But I so little expected to see His Majesty after what you said, and are in no hurry to interrupt him now you are here. I replied bluntly,
determined that,
whoever he deceived, he should not flatter himself he deceived me.
Pooh, man.
I am not a fool, I continued. What is this? He cried, with a desperate attempt to keep up the farce. I don't understand you.
No.
The shoe is on the other foot. I understand you, I replied drily.
Chut, man.
I continued. You don't make a cat's paw of me. I see the game. You are for sitting in Madame de Surdy's seat, and giving your son a hat, and your groom a controllership, and your niece, a... Hush, hush.
M. de Rosny,
he muttered, turning white and red, and wiping his brow with his kerchief.
Mon Dieu.
Your words might, if overheard, make things very unpleasant for de Perrault, I said.
And M. de Rosny?
I shrugged my shoulders contemptuously. Tush.
Man.
I said. Do you think that I sit in no safer seat than that?
Ah.
But when Madame de Beaufort is queen, he said slyly. If she ever is, I replied, affecting greater confidence than I at that time felt.
Well,
to be sure, he said slowly, if she ever is. And he looked towards the king and his companion, who were still chatting gaily. Then he stole a crafty glance at me. Do you wish her to be?
He muttered.
Queen? I said. God forbid. It would be a disgrace to France? He whispered, and he laid his hand on my arm and looked eagerly into my face. Yes, I said. A blot on his fame? I nodded. A slur on a score of noble families? I could not deny it. Then is it not worthwhile to avoid all that? He murmured, his face pale, and his small eyes glued to mine. Is it not worth a little sacrifice?
M. de Rosny?
And risk? I said. Possibly. While the words were still on my lips, something stirred close to us, behind the yew hedge beside which we were standing. Perrault darted in a moment to the opening, and I after him. We were just in time to catch a glimpse of a figure disappearing round the corner of the house. Well, I said grimly, what about being overheard now? De Perrault wiped his face. Thank heaven, he said. It was only my son. Now let me explain to you. But our hasty movement had caught the king's eye, and he came towards us, covering himself as he approached. I had now an opportunity of learning whether the girl was, in fact, as innocent as she seemed, and as every particular of our reception had declared her. And I watched her closely when Perrault's mode of address betrayed the king's identity. Suffice it that the vivid blush which on the instant suffused her face, and the lively emotion which almost overcame her, left me in no doubt. With a charming air of bashfulness, and just so much timid awkwardness as rendered her doubly bewitching, she tried to kneel and kiss the king's hand. He would not permit this, however, but saluted her cheek. It seems that you were right, Sire. She murmured.